Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Reflections on Liber Cordis Scincti Serpente, Vel 65, sub figura Adonai. The Book of the Heart Girt with the Serpent, chapter 1, verses 12 through 24. Verse 12. Then there was silence. Speech had done with us a while. There is a light so strenuous that it is not perceived as light. Again, the implication is of the apophatic silence of the night of Pan, underlying the ecstatic visionary voice of the lux, of the manifestation of the divine genius. The sacred speech is from and of the silence of the Kabbalistic zero. From this perspective, the divine presence is best expressed through a kind of absence, or, conversely, that when the equation of reality has been solved or equilibrated, that its ultimate value is nothing. Yet this value of zero facilitates infinite factors to be positively expressed because they all cancel out with each other in the end, so that the sum is not. The strenuous quality of the lux overwhelms the functioning of the ruach so that it is stunned into stillness. Neshama can thereby manifest. 13. Wolf's bane is not so sharp as steel, yet it pierceth the body more subtly. The text now shifts into the poetic diction of romantic decadence. For Crowley, recourse to this register of symbolism typically has queer and antinomian connotations. It is the bourgeois values of Christian colonial culture that continue to predominate in modern society, in Crowley's time as in ours. These false values oppress the spirit of humanity, impeding the full flourishing of its potential. The subtle effect of the piercing of wolfsbane is an allusion to the various occult properties, so-called, the natural magic of early modernity, grimoires of Agrippa, etc. Just as magnetism was originally considered an immaterial force, distinct from other more immediately observable properties pertaining to extended bodies, such as weight and measure, so the phenomenon of spiritual illumination appears occult to the vulgar. Yet its effects are deeper than those explored by allegedly scientific psychology. Likewise, by analogy, the liberty of the illuminated appears wicked to the ethically immature. Yet from a broader point of view, this is not so, and it is the Puritan who is morally depraved. 14. Even as evil kisses corrupt the blood, so do my words devour the spirit of man. Again, evil is here from the point of view of the profane. The adept is beyond good and evil, not in the sense that they have no ethical values, quite the contrary, in fact, but rather in the sense that their sense of morality is based in concrete human experience, not in authoritarian fantasies of otherworldly fictions. There's also doubtless a queer connotation here for Crowley to the kisses in question, although this interpretation does not exclude other experiential modalities. The words are the voice of the angel, which communicate the logos, or meaning of its vision. The true will thus communicated eats up and displaces the more limited perspective of the profane personality of the everyday sense of self. 15. I breathe, and there is infinite dis-ease in the spirit. The breath of the angel is the energized movement of the prana, the somatic affective sense of bodily presence. In yoga, this is represented by the awakening of the Kundalini serpent coiled 3.5 times at the base of the spine in the Muladhara chakra. This is clearly also the sacred snake introduced earlier in verse 1. Its energy is the Shakti, the feminine divine force corresponding to Babylon in the Thelemic theogony, and as it rises upwards through the spinal column, various magical powers become accessible. Again, the disease or dis-ease of the spirit is the disruption of the limited sense of self by the arising of the gnosis. 16. As an acid eats into steel, as a cancer that utterly corrupts the body, so am I unto the spirit of man. In addition to whatever somatic experiences might occur in yoga, the symbolism of the rising of the Kundalini serpent metaphorically describes the redirection of the lived sense of personal identity away from the distractions of the everyday round of activities and towards the deeper purposes of the true will and its great work. The old self is subjected to alchemical putrefaction and transmuted into gold, a precious, beautifully shining metal that is immune to chemical corrosion. 17. I shall not rest until I have dissolved it all. Once awakened, the gnosis overrides other more limited priorities, leading to the death of the old self and its replacement with a new, more effective personality. Failure to acknowledge this prioritization leads to klephotic obsession and likewise a kind of death, although in this case there is mere death without transmutation. Once the great work is begun, it must move forward to its completion. Otherwise, addiction and neurosis will instead be the result. The angel is a jealous god, and one cannot serve two masters. 18. So also the light that is absorbed. One absorbs little and is called white and glistening. One absorbs all and is called black. This metaphor compares and contrasts the formulas of Lux and Nox, corresponding to the mystical unity and the Kabbalistic nothingness, respectively. From the point of view of identification with the personality, gnosis is experienced as the illumination of that personality. From the deeper transpersonal perspective of anatman or non-self, which is the recognition that the personal self has no ultimately abiding substantive essence, comes the release of the death drive and the ability to commit to projects and purposes that transcend one's solely personal agenda and narrative. Only from this latter perspective is the full potential of the true will realizable. 19. Therefore, O my darling, art thou black. The gnosis whose logos the holy guardian angel serves as the symbolic mediator for is ultimately an expression of the Night of Pan of the Kabbalistic zero. Only from a transpersonal point of view is the true will infinite and eternal. Otherwise, it remains tied to personal ambitions and aspirations, which, while useful for the initial stages of the path, must eventually be transcended to avoid obsession and neurosis. This transcendence is not otherworldly, however. The dimension of the drive is perhaps best characterized as interpersonal rather than transpersonal, although this language has its uses and does not need to be simply discarded, merely adequately contextualized. Hegel's notion of spirit here provides an appropriate thematization of the domain of human collectivity that is the proper object of concern for the true will. Likewise, the Buddhist notion of the bodhisattva characterizes an enlightenment that is oriented towards the benefit of all beings. Indeed, how else could enlightenment be expressed when the whole point in Buddhism is that there is no personal self that can become enlightened? The very release from this illusion is prajna, insight into enlightenment. Yet from this void place of the spirit, compassionate concern for other beings nevertheless spontaneously co-arises with and as tantric ecstasy. In Thelema, this phenomenon is known as love under will. 20. O my beautiful, I have likened thee to a jet Nubian slave, a boy of melancholy eyes. Crowley deploys the Orientalist imagery of black as the skin color of African slaves. Nubia is the region south of Egypt, whose inhabitants were relatively darker skinned than the Egyptians, and who were prized as slaves in the Ottoman Caliphate, whose traders often facilitated access to Central African populations to the European Atlantic slave trade. The sexual exploitation of black slaves by their masters, whether Muslim or Christian, is obviously a sensitive subject, and this symbolism, like that of Babylon as a prostitute, therefore needs to be historically contextualized. Also, it needs to be read in the framework of the spiritual purposes of this, and by extension all Thelemic texts, which is the liberation of humanity from all modes of oppressive restriction. In order to represent this liberation, historically oppressed classes of human beings, such as prostitutes and slaves, are used as symbols. In other words, to signify the possibility of human freedom and liberation, the existence of human persons who have historically not been free must first be acknowledged. It is therefore appropriate, indeed necessary, to deal with the topics of slavery and the status of women under patriarchy. Let the postmodern moral Puritan of whatever political stripe beware not to misinterpret the purposes of this holy book. 21. O the filthy one, the dog, they cry against thee, because thou art my beloved. The queer, forbidden relationship between the narrator and the slave boy should be compared with the similar scenario depicted in The Scented Garden of Abdullah the Satirist of Shiraz. Again, the antinomian element is intended to criticize the bourgeois values of Puritan propriety, originally in the context of the post-Victorian British Empire. However, Christian colonial ideology remains alive and well in the 21st century, and Crowley's critical stance retains its primacy. The Book of the Law, chapter 2, verse 19. Is a god to live in a dog? No. Yet, dog spelled backwards is God, just as no reversed is on, the magical formula of the sun worshipped in the Gnostic Mass. It all depends on one's perspective. For the pure, all things are pure, wrote Augustine, but let the aspirant be on their guard not to mistake neurosis for purity. Wilhelm Reich's emotional plague takes many guises, and those who are the sickest are also the quickest to declare themselves healed. In all things, the true will is the criterion, and as this is a spirit of freedom, wisdom, and light, these should be the qualities of the experiences sought. If restriction, ignorance, and misery are instead the results of one's action, for oneself or for others, then there is no purity. 22. Happy are they that praise thee, for they see thee with mine eyes. The prejudices of the common herd have no place in the discernment of spirits. The post-colonial capitalist world order enforces the constant vulgarization of mass media, endlessly soliciting prejudice and its hysterically futile counter-response in order to politically paralyze the masses, thereby ensuring that the given class system remains fundamentally in place. The magician is lost in the labyrinth of popular culture unless they can see with the eyes of the initiate, become savvy to the illusion. Then its obsessing distraction loses its hold in the ecstatic condition of being, that is our true birthright as human beings becomes reaccessible. 23. Not aloud shall they praise thee, but in the night watch one shall steal close and grip thee with the secret grip. Another shall privily cast a crown of violets over thee. A third shall greatly dare and press mad lips to thine. This passage is an intertextual reference to the story of Nicodemus in the Gospel of John, who recognizes the messianic status of the Christ and visits him in secrecy at night to receive his blessing. In the Christian esoteric tradition, Nicodemus represents the contemplative mystic, who separates themselves from the activity of daily commerce to seek the inward unitive life. In a Thelemic context, this motif serves as a metaphor for initiation. This verse describes three aspects of initiation and of a corresponding deepening of intimacy with the divine. The reception of the secret grip concerns the formal shared social structures of initiation of whatever rite. The crowning with violets signifies the recognition of the divine symbolized within the initiation. Finally, the kiss symbolizes the attainment of divine union. 24. Yea, the night shall cover all. The night shall cover all. The night is the night of Pan, of the Kabbalistic nothingness that covers or ultimately subsumes the experience of spiritual unity, when that unification is ripened and brought to its fulfillment. Pan is the all that dialectically encompasses both the appearances of unity and duality as symbolized by the magical formula 0 = 2. Love is the law, love under will.